In a peaceful and lush village, where wheat fields danced in the wind and sunflowers turned their faces toward the sun, life flowed with a steady and carefree rhythm. Dusty roads wound between mud brick houses, and people spent most of their time working in the fields, chatting in the market, and praying in the mosque. But in recent days, new whispers had begun to spread among the villagers. Not about the harvest, not about the price of wheat, nor even about sudden changes in the weather, but about something no one had expected. The whispers were about Lily, a young and beautiful woman who was one of the most well-known figures in the village. She had grown up on a horse farm inherited from her father. The love of horses ran through her veins since childhood, nurtured by her parents, who were renowned breeders of purebred horses. Among all the horses she cared for, one held a special place in her heart. Rad, a strong and majestic black stallion that was always by her side. After her parents passed away, the horse farm became Lily's responsibility. She continued to live there with her husband, Salem, a hard-working farmer and a kind-hearted man. Unlike Lily, Salem had little interest in horses. He spent most of his time tending to the fields and gardens, caring for the crops he cultivated. Yet, he never stood in the way of Lily's love for horses and was happy to see her joy whenever she was with Rad. Everything seemed normal until something strange disturbed the peace of the village. Lily's belly suddenly began to grow. At first, everyone assumed she was pregnant. Neighbors wished her well, and the village women asked with smiles, "Congratulations, Lily. How far along are you?" But Lily's answers were always vague. She either changed the subject or simply smiled weakly and said nothing. At first, no one questioned her behavior, but as the weeks passed, something unnatural became evident. Her belly was growing too fast. Murmurs and questioning glances spread throughout the village. Some said she must be carrying twins, but even in that case, the rapid growth was unusual. The gossip became more serious. In the mosque, in the bakery, in the market, everyone was talking about her. Some laughed and whispered mockingly, "When was the last time you saw Lily outside the stable? She's always with Rad." At first, these words were taken as jokes, but soon they took on a more unsettling tone. Some villagers started calling her cruel names, while others simply looked at her with unease. Yet Salem, a man who never paid attention to rumors, continued his life as usual. He was a man of action, not one to waste time on baseless talk. But one day, while he was at the market, an old woman approached him. She glanced around cautiously before speaking in a hushed voice. "My son, I don't want to upset you, but there are troubling words about your wife spreading in the village." Salem's face darkened. He asked firmly, "What do you mean?" The old woman took a deep breath and, in a voice laced with fear, said, "Her belly is growing too fast for any normal pregnancy. She hasn't seen a doctor, and no one ever sees her outside the stable. People are saying strange things." A lump of worry formed in Salem's throat. Until that moment, he had convinced himself that everything was normal. But now, with the villagers' words echoing in his mind, he could no longer ignore the signs. He returned home with a troubled mind, spending the entire afternoon in silence. That night, as he sorted through his thoughts, he realized it was time to uncover the truth. That night, Salem quietly left the house and walked toward the stable. As he opened the door, he saw Lily standing beside Rad, running her fingers through his sleek black mane, whispering something softly into his ear. Salem cleared his throat slightly to announce his presence. Lily looked up. She gave him a faint smile, but there was something hidden in her eyes, perhaps fear, perhaps anxiety, or maybe a secret. Without hesitation, Salem said, "Lily, we need to talk." Her smile vanished. In a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "What is it? Why do you look so worried?" Salem held her gaze and said, "You're hiding something from me about your belly. Why haven't you seen a doctor? Why have you been acting so mysteriously all this time?" For a moment, Lily froze. Then she took a deep breath, but instead of answering, she merely gave a faint smile. "Maybe it's twins. How can we know for sure?" But Salem didn't look away. The invisible gap between them had never felt wider. At that moment, Rod lifted his head and stared directly at Salem with piercing eyes. Then he stepped forward, positioning himself between them. Salem instinctively took a step back, his heartbeat quickening. Why did this horse always stand between them? Was it just a simple bond between Lily and Rod? Or was there something happening that he didn't understand? The whispers in the village were no longer quiet murmurs, but had turned into loud, sharp voices. Women in the market exchanged knowing glances and whispered under their breath, while men in the tea-houses laughed loudly, "Have you seen her belly? This is not normal." But what truly worried Lily was not the villagers' words. It was the strange, unfamiliar feeling growing inside her. It was no longer just fatigue or morning sickness. She felt an unusual heaviness in her body, an aching pain in her lower back that grew worse by the day, and dizziness that kept her bedridden for hours. Her sleep was restless, and in the mornings she struggled to get out of bed. Salem noticed all these changes. At first, he tried to convince himself that it was normal, perhaps due to the size of the fetus, but when he saw that Lily could barely walk, his unease deepened. One night, as Lily returned from the stable, Salem suddenly took her hand. With a firm voice, he said, "Tomorrow morning, we're going to the city. You need to see a specialist." Lily frowned slightly and replied calmly, "But I've already seen a doctor. There's nothing wrong?" Salem shook his head. "No, this isn't normal, Lily. You're only in your 3rd month, but your belly looks like it's 8 months along. You're growing weaker every day. Don't you see it?" Lily averted her gaze, placed her hand over her stomach, and took a deep breath. After a moment of silence, she whispered, "Fine, we'll go tomorrow." But that night, as she lay in bed, a strange fear gripped her. What if something was truly wrong? What if something was growing inside her that wasn't normal? She placed her hand on her belly and closed her eyes. This wasn't just exhaustion. Something deep within her had changed. At times, she felt odd sensations in her womb, something beyond the usual movements of a baby. But every time these thoughts crept into her mind, she pushed them away and went to the stable. Beside Rod, her beloved black stallion, she always found peace. Only his presence could quiet her fears. "It's fine. We'll go tomorrow." She whispered the words to herself, this time with a quiet but firm resolve. At dawn, Salem woke up, got dressed, and packed some bread and water so Lily wouldn't go hungry on the road. But when he stepped outside, he saw her by the stable. Lily was holding Rod's head in her arms, whispering softly into his ear, as if saying goodbye. The horse took a deep breath and lowered his head slightly, as if he understood. Salem took a step toward her and said gently, "Lily, we need to go." Lily ran her fingers through Rod's soft mane one last time and whispered, "Wait for me. I'll come back." Then she turned toward Salem, who was waiting by the car. He helped her get in, and as they drove away from the village, Rod stood still, watching them go with deep, knowing eyes, as if he understood what was coming. The road to the city was long, and both of them sat in heavy silence. Lily stared out the window, lost in thought, while Salem gripped the steering wheel tightly, his hands tense. When they arrived at the hospital, one of the most experienced doctors in the city, Dr. Yusuf, greeted them. He reviewed Lily's medical records and, after a brief pause, smiled. "We'll do a more detailed examination today, yes?" Salem immediately replied, "Yes, doctor. My wife is pregnant, but her belly is growing too fast. We're worried." Dr. Yusuf nodded and turned to Lily. "Very well. Let's take a look." They took Lily to the ultrasound room while Salem stood anxiously in the corner, watching the monitor closely. Moments later, the doctor's calm, reassuring voice filled the room. "Yes, I see 2 fetuses." Both Salem and Lily stared at the screen. 2 small shadows moved inside the womb. Salem whispered under his breath, "It really is twins." For a moment, relief washed over him, until he noticed that the doctor's expression remained serious. Dr. Yusuf was staring at the screen, as if searching for something. Then, he moved the probe lower and focused. Salem's heart pounded. "Doctor, is something wrong?" Dr. Yusuf took a deep breath, then turned off the machine and faced them. "The babies appear healthy, but there's something unusual." Lily and Salem's eyes widened in alarm. "Lily's belly size doesn't match her pregnancy stage." The doctor hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. "This could be due to several factors: excessive amniotic fluid, unexpected changes in the uterus, or—" He paused for a moment before carefully adding, "or an abnormal growth alongside the fetuses." Salem instinctively took Lily's hand. With a trembling voice, Lily asked, "Is it dangerous, doctor?" Dr. Yusuf met their eyes with a serious expression and said softly, "Right now, we can't say for certain. We need more tests. It would be best if you stayed in the hospital tonight so we can get answers quickly." Salem looked at Lily. For the first time, he saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before: real fear. But deep beneath that fear, there was something else: a hidden strength, a quiet faith. "Lily, aren't you afraid?" His voice was soft, as if he was scared of her answer. Lily swallowed hard, then glanced down at her belly, and with a voice that was not trembling, but filled with certainty, she said, "I am, but I need to know the truth." Lily gave a soft smile, but it was a sincere one. "I am afraid, but you are by my side, and our children are with us. Everything will be fine, God willing." Salem took a deep breath and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. At that moment, despite all their fears, they both knew one thing for certain: they would face this battle together. About an hour later, Dr. Yusuf emerged from the examination room, holding a file in his hands. His serious expression made Salem's heart race faster. With a calm but weighty tone, he said, "Please, come inside with me." Lily and Salem exchanged a brief glance before stepping into the room in silence. The air was heavy, as if time itself had paused for a moment. Salem held Lily's hand tightly and didn't let go. Dr. Yusuf placed the file on the table, looked directly at them, and said, "First of all, I want to reassure you. Your babies are healthy. We found no defects or complications." Lily let out a small breath of relief, but the doctor's expression did not change. It was clear he wasn't finished speaking. After a short pause, he continued, "However, during the examination, we discovered a large mass in your uterus." Lily's breath caught in her throat, and her eyes widened with fear. Salem, his voice filled with anxiety, murmured, "A mass? Do you mean a tumor?" The doctor nodded solemnly. "Yeah, and what's concerning is that this tumor is growing at an abnormal rate, almost as fast as the baby's." Lily instinctively placed her hands over her stomach, as if trying to shield her children. Salem, his mind racing, asked, "What does that mean? Is it dangerous?" Dr. Yusuf took a deep breath before responding. "At the moment, it hasn't caused an immediate threat. But if it continues growing rapidly, it could start putting pressure on your internal organs, potentially affecting breathing, circulation, and even childbirth." Salem tightened his grip on Lily's hand and asked firmly, "And what is the solution? Is there a treatment?" The doctor looked at them for a moment before speaking in a softer tone. "The only solution is surgery to remove the tumor." Lily immediately lifted her head and asked, "So I can have the surgery, right?" But the doctor exhaled slowly and carefully said, "Yes, but that would mean terminating the pregnancy." A heavy silence filled the room. The air felt suffocating. Lily's face went pale, and Salem held his breath. "No, that's impossible," Lily whispered, her voice trembling as her hands clutched her belly. "I can't lose my babies." Dr. Yusuf remained calm as he said, "You don't have to decide right away. We can wait for now. But you must understand that every day that passes increases the risks. If the tumor becomes too large, surgery will become even more complicated and dangerous for both you and the babies." Salem's mind was flooded with questions and uncertainties. "Can we wait? Is it safe, doctor?" The doctor slowly shook his head. "We can wait for some time, but if we reach the 7th or 8th month and the tumor has grown significantly, there may be no safe options left. At that point, both the mother and the babies will be in serious danger." Salem turned to Lily and saw a fear in her eyes that he had never seen before. But Lily was staring at her stomach, a single thought echoing in her mind. What if this mass isn't just an ordinary tumor? The silence in the room became heavier, almost unbearable. Lily kept looking at her belly, lost in thought. For months she had nurtured her children inside her, imagined their future, envisioned the moment they would be born. And now she was faced with an impossible decision: to risk her own life to bring them into the world, or even the thought of that second option shattered her soul. Salem's eyes filled with tears, and with a choked voice he said, "Lily, whatever you decide, I will always be by your side. But please, think about yourself too." Lily took a deep breath and then, with a firm and resolute voice, said, "No matter the cost, I will protect my children." Dr. Yusuf looked at her with admiration, but he couldn't hide his concern. "Lily, I respect your courage, but this is not just about willpower. If the tumor continues to grow, your body might not be able to handle childbirth. The risk is real." Lily placed her hand on her stomach again, lost in deep thought. Salem stood beside her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. After a long pause, Salem turned to the doctor and asked in a hoarse voice, "If we choose to continue the pregnancy, is there any way to monitor the situation?" Dr. Yusuf considered for a moment before replying, "Yes, but she will need to be monitored weekly. Regular checkups, ultrasounds, and blood tests will be necessary to track the tumor's growth. If things become too dangerous, we may have to make an urgent decision." Once again, silence filled the room. Then Lily raised her head and, in a voice steadier than ever, declared, "I am ready. I will not give up." Dr. Yusuf studied her for a long moment. then nodded with respect. "Very well. I will do everything I can to help you." As they left the hospital, Salem drove in silence. Lily sat beside him, gazing out of the window. Neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the hum of the car's engine and Salem's anxious breathing. When they arrived back at the village, Lily stepped out of the car and slowly walked toward the stable. Rod was standing there, waiting, as if he had known she would return. His presence always gave her peace. She approached him, ran her fingers through his soft mane, and whispered gently in his ear, "Everything will be fine, won't it?" Rod lowered his head slightly and took a deep breath. Lily felt as if he was answering her in his own way. Salem stood behind her, watching in silence. Then, with a voice full of worry, he asked, "Do you really believe you can go through with this?" Lily turned to him, looked into his eyes, and asked, "And you, Salem, do you have faith in me?" Salem took a deep breath, then stepped closer, wrapped his arms around her, and placed his hand on her belly. "Yes, but I'm so afraid of losing you." Lily closed her eyes, rested her head against his chest, and whispered softly, "I'm afraid too, but I have faith. We will get through this together." The days that followed were harder than they had imagined. Going to the hospital became a routine. Every week, Lily underwent thorough examinations. Every time they saw their babies on the ultrasound screen, a mix of joy and fear filled their hearts. Salem watched as Lily's belly grew bigger each day, while her condition worsened. Her face grew pale, her body weaker. Every time the doctors warned them, "If the tumor continues growing at this rate, things will become very dangerous." But Lily never backed down. Every morning, she woke up with a smile, placed her hands on her belly, as if comforting her children. She could feel their movements, and that gave her the strength to keep going. Nothing could make her change her decision. Rumors spread like fire on dry wood. People in the village whispered, "Why doesn't Lily leave the house anymore? Her belly is enormous. She can barely walk in the streets. What if whatever is inside her isn't normal? They say she goes to the stable at midnight, praying and crying." Fear makes people create stories, and when they don't understand something, they turn it into rumors. But Lily didn't care. She was fighting the most important battle of her life, and she wouldn't let people's words shake her resolve. But the rumors didn't stay confined to the village. One of the villagers took a photo of Lily's house while passing by and posted it online. With a mocking caption, they wrote, "Do you think whatever is inside her is normal?" Within hours, the image went viral, receiving hundreds of comments. "Look at her. It's like she's giving birth to a creature, not a baby." Even she and her husband must have doubts about this. Maybe she's really going to give birth to a horse. When Lily saw the comments for the first time, she tried to ignore them. But when she reached the ones comparing her unborn child to an animal, her throat burned with emotion. Her eyes filled with tears. Her phone slipped from her hand. She sat down in silence, trapped between anger, sorrow, and helplessness. When Salem returned home, he found Lily sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes red and swollen. "Lily, what happened?" he asked, his voice full of concern. Lily only shook her head, but when Salem saw her phone lying on the floor, he understood everything. He picked it up. He read the post. He saw the comments. His heart pounded with rage. His fists clenched, his face turned red, and he muttered under his breath, "Who writes this garbage? How can people be this cruel?" Lily gently took his hand, With a trembling voice, she said, "Salem, let it go. It doesn't matter what they say. They only talk, but I am the one living this pain." But Salem couldn't swallow his anger, and the next morning he decided he wouldn't stay silent. When Salem went to the market, he walked straight into the coffee house, a place where people always talked about others. At that moment, a group of young men were whispering, "Salem took his wife to the city. Maybe he's starting to doubt it himself." But imagine, what if what's inside her isn't normal? Another one laughed mockingly. "Let's bet on it. Is it a baby or something else?" Salem's blood boiled. He stormed forward and slammed his hand onto the table with all his strength. "What are you saying?" The coffee house fell silent. Everyone turned to look at him. One of the young men chuckled nervously. "Relax, Salem. We were just joking." But Salem wasn't in the mood for jokes. His eyes burned with fury. "My wife is fighting for her life. She is fighting for our children." His voice trembled with anger and pain. No one had anything to say. Silence filled the room. Salem took a deep breath. His voice softened, but remained firm. "None of you have ever faced this kind of pain. None of you have had to choose between your own life and your children's. But I will do whatever it takes to protect my wife and my children. Understand that." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the coffee house, slamming the door behind him, leaving everyone in stunned silence. But as the days passed, Lily's condition worsened. Even standing for a few minutes left her exhausted. She began experiencing severe pain and shortness of breath. And then the fainting spells began. One day, as she was getting out of bed, a sudden wave of dizziness hit her. Before she could say a word, she collapsed. Salem ran toward her. Just before she hit the ground, he caught her in his arms, but for the first time in his life, he felt true fear. He couldn't wait any longer. The next morning, he placed Lily in the car and drove to the hospital as fast as he could. His heart pounded violently, and the fear inside him was greater than ever before. Dr. Yosef stared intently at the ultrasound screen. Then, with a serious and firm voice, he said, "We can't let Lily go home anymore." Salem froze in place. "But it's not time for the birth yet." His voice was weak, as if he was hoping the doctor was wrong. Dr. Yosef shook his head calmly. "I know, but the situation has become too dangerous." His face remained serious and resolute. "If we wait any longer, we might reach a point where there's no way back. And at that point, we could lose both the mother and the babies." Salem felt as if the ground beneath him was shaking, but when he looked into Lily's eyes, he saw that despite her pale face and weak body, she was still standing strong. There was both weakness and strength in her gaze, and Salem made a silent vow in his heart. "I won't let her go, no matter what." The day of Lily's transfer to the hospital arrived. As Salem helped her into the car, an unsettling feeling twisted in his gut. Lily looked back at the stable one last time. Rod stood anxiously in his place, stomping his hooves on the ground and lifting his head toward the sky, as if he understood what was happening. With a trembling voice, Lily whispered, "Wait for me, my friend. I'll be back soon." Rod lowered his head slightly. A deep sorrow swirled in his eyes. Meanwhile, Salem started the car. His eyes were on the road, but his heart was filled with worry. Beside him, Lily stared silently out the window. After Lily was admitted, time moved slower than ever. Every day, new tests and examinations were conducted. But despite everything, the tumor continued to grow. Lily's breathing became more difficult. Eating became a struggle, and Salem had to feed her spoonful by spoonful. Every bite was a battle. And then, that night arrived. Lily suddenly woke up, gasping in pain. Her belly had become as hard as stone, and the pain spread through her entire body. She gripped the sheets and whispered through ragged breaths, "Salem, something's wrong." Salem jumped up in panic. His hand shot toward the nurse call button, pressing it frantically. "Doctor, hurry!" Moments later, a team of doctors and nurses rushed into the room. One measured her blood pressure. Another prepared the ultrasound machine. Dr. Yosef examined the screen carefully, then his expression darkened. "We can't wait any longer. The mother and baby's lives are in danger." Salem pleaded desperately. "Is there no other way?" But the doctor only shook his head. "We have to perform an emergency C-section immediately." Lily was slowly losing consciousness. With the last of her strength, she took Salem's hand and whispered weakly, "No matter what happens, take care of our children." Salem's eyes filled with tears. "No, don't say that. We'll get through this together." But his voice was already fading for Lily, and moments later, she slipped into darkness. The hospital's emergency alarms blared. A critical situation was declared. Doctors rushed Lily toward the operating room as Salem ran alongside them. But just as he was about to enter, a nurse stopped him. "You can't go in. We'll do everything we can." For the last time, Salem held Lily's hand, but she was already unconscious. Silent tears rolled down his cheeks. "Please, don't leave me." The operating room doors closed, and Salem, helpless and defenseless, could do nothing but wait. Inside the operating room, the doctors worked swiftly. "She's losing too much blood. We need to move faster," Dr. Yosef shouted. The scalpel sliced through Lily's abdomen with precision. Blood immediately gushed out. Nurses wiped it away quickly as the doctors focused on saving both mother and children. "We have to deliver the babies now." The first baby was pulled out, a tiny girl. The doctor handed her to a nurse. The nurse gently patted her back, and suddenly the baby's cry echoed through the room. "The girl is fine." But the battle wasn't over yet. A heavy silence fell over the operating room. The second baby wasn't moving. "He's not breathing," a doctor shouted. Nurses immediately began massaging the baby's chest. "Come on, breathe." Time seemed to freeze. Outside the room, Salem sat in the hallway, hands clasped together, praying from the depths of his soul. And then, a faint but clear cry broke through the air. The baby cried, "Both are alive!" But the joy didn't last long. "The mother is losing too much blood. Her pulse is dropping." Lily's life hung between darkness and light, while her husband and children waited for her. Did her body still have the strength to continue fighting? Time was running out. In the hospital corridors, a heavy silence hung in the air. Salem sat on a wooden bench, his hands clasped together, his head down, and his entire body trembling with anxiety. Cold sweat dripped from his forehead. He had faced many hardships in his life. He had lost loved ones. He had endured hunger during difficult days. He had worked tirelessly to save the farm from ruin. But never before had he felt this kind of fear. His eyes were fixed on the closed doors of the operating room, as if staring at them could assure him that Lily was still alive. But was she? Was he losing her? And then, finally, the door opened. Dr. Yosef stepped out. His face was pale and exhausted. His clothes were stained with blood, a sign of the surgery's difficulty. Salem immediately jumped to his feet. Breathing felt impossible. "Lily, how is she? Will she survive?" The doctor took a deep breath, then placed a hand on Salem's shoulder and said in a calm voice, "The babies are fine. Your daughter is healthy." But Salem only heard one thing, the hesitation in the doctor's voice. "And my wife?" A moment of silence passed. Then Dr. Yosef spoke softly, "She is still in danger. She lost a lot of blood, and we are trying to stabilize her condition. The next few hours will be critical." Salem closed his eyes. His legs could no longer support him. "I can't lose her. She is the mother of my children." The doctor squeezed his shoulder, as if trying to offer comfort. "She is strong. She is still fighting. Now, if you want, you can see your children." Salem stood in front of the neonatal intensive care unit. When he entered, the bright lights and sharp scent of disinfectants greeted him. His eyes landed on the tiny machines and transparent incubators where his babies lay, their breathing weak and fragile. He stepped toward them. His trembling hands rested against the clear glass. "And here you are," he whispered, his voice shaking. The tiny girl, as if sensing her father's presence, moved her hand slightly. But the boy remained still. Other than the faint rise and fall of his small chest, there was no other sign of life in him. A lump formed in Salem's throat. He swallowed hard and whispered, "Your mother will be here soon, too. She is very strong." But he was no longer as sure as before. Days passed, and with each passing moment, Salem's hope faded more and more. Lily remained in the intensive care unit. Would she wake up? And then, after 4 days, Salem sat beside her bed, his head down, his hopes dimmer than ever. But suddenly, a faint sound reached his ears. He lifted his head abruptly. His eyes widened in shock. "Lily?" he nearly shouted. Her eyes were half open. Her gaze was still weak, but she was alive. Salem immediately took her hand. Tears fell from his eyes uncontrollably. "I was so scared of losing you." With all her weakness, Lily managed a faint smile and whispered with difficulty, "I'm here." Then, in a barely audible voice, she asked, "My babies?" Salem wiped his tears and smiled. "They are fine. They are strong, just like you." A silent tear slipped from the corner of Lily's eye. "I want to see them." Salem nodded. "Not only will you see them, but you will hold them in your arms." The first meeting with her children. Lily was still weak. Every breath was painful. The doctors insisted she needed more rest. But her mind was consumed by only one thought: her children. She hadn't touched them yet. That thought tightened her throat. And the next morning, with the help of a nurse, she sat in a wheelchair. Salem gently placed his hand behind her, supporting her. Together, they made their way to the neonatal intensive care unit. The steady beeping of medical devices filled the air. Several small machines were keeping fragile newborns alive. The nurse pushed the wheelchair toward 2 tiny incubators. And there they were, 2 little angels. Their skin was still wrinkled. Their breaths were weak and unsteady. But they were alive. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes. With a trembling voice, she whispered, "I'm here, my loves." As if the little girl had heard her mother's voice, she moved her tiny fingers slightly. Lily placed her shaking hand against the glass, and at that moment, her little boy lifted his frail hand, as if trying to reach her. Salem, with teary eyes, smiled and said, "Look, they know you." But their son remained motionless. Salem stepped closer. He whispered gently, "You will survive too, my son. We are waiting for you, me, your mother, and your sister." At that moment, all the fears, all the pain, and all the whispers of others disappeared. The only thing that remained was a family who had fought for their children. As the days passed, Salem and Lily stayed beside their babies. They spoke to them, caressed them through the glass, and believed with all their hearts that love was the strongest medicine. And then the doctors brought good news. "Your daughter is recovering faster than we expected." And 1 month later, the long-awaited day finally arrived. Salem stood beside Lily, his tear-filled eyes watching the scene before him. Then, with a smile full of pride and love, he said, "She recognized you. She knows her mother." Lily caressed her daughter's cheek. A powerful feeling took root in her heart, one she had never experienced before. A feeling of infinite determination. Nothing in this world could stop her from protecting these two children. Not now, not ever. After 2 months of battle and waiting, the time had finally come to return home. The doctors and nurses smiled with pride as they announced that Salem and Lily's little ones were now ready to leave. Lily sat in a wheelchair, holding her daughter in her arms, while Salem carefully cradled their son. As they walked out of the hospital doors, the staff bid them farewell with warm smiles, as if sending two little warriors into the world. And when they arrived home, Lily took a deep breath, her eyes filled with tears. "Finally, we are here." But what moved her the most was the sight that greeted them upon arrival. Ra'ad, their loyal black horse, stood silently in front of the house, as if he had always known she would return. Lily couldn't hold back her tears. "Ra'ad, I'm back," she whispered, her voice full of longing and affection. The horse lifted his head cautiously and stepped toward her, his movements slower and more careful than ever. It was as if he sensed the presence of the tiny children. Gently, he sniffed the delicate blankets wrapped around the babies and then, with a special kind of respect, lowered his head. Salem smiled and said, "He was waiting for us." Lily stroked Ra'ad's soft black mane and softly replied, "And now we are all back." In that moment, all the pain, all the fears, and all the battles they had endured no longer mattered. Only one thing did. They were now a complete family. Lily smiled, ran her fingers through Ra'ad's mane, and said in a gentle voice, "I missed you too." Then she looked at her children and said, "My loves, this is Ra'ad, your first friend." Once again, the horse lowered his head, as if welcoming the tiny newcomers. Then he stood quietly beside Lily, like an unwavering guardian. A new chapter had begun for Salem and Lily's family. They had survived the hardest days, but an easy road did not lie ahead. Lily still needed treatment to fully recover. And Salem had to balance caring for his wife, raising the children, and managing the farm. Despite the exhaustion and challenges, he had never felt this kind of happiness before. One night, Lily sat on the porch, gently rocking her daughter in her arms. Salem sat beside her, holding their son, a soft smile on his lips. "Do you remember?" Salem asked. Lily lifted her head. "Remember what?" Salem gazed into the distance. The sun was setting, casting golden and orange hues across the sky. "Everything people said about us. How they judged us. How they laughed at us." Lily was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I remember it well." Salem took a deep breath. Now they are all silent, because They saw the truth. They saw how you fought, how you stood for your children. Lily smiled, looking at her babies with love, and softly said, "I don't care what they say anymore. The only thing that matters is our family." Salem nodded. "Exactly, our family." At that moment, Lily's eyes lit up with excitement. "Salem, let's take a family photo." Salem laughed. "That's a wonderful idea." He held one of the babies, Lily held the other, and they stood beside Ra'ad. A peaceful and beautiful scene stretched before them. The sky was glowing with the magical colors of sunset, and a cool breeze gently brushed their faces. Salem set the camera's timer and quickly stood beside his family. And just as the photo was taken, they both smiled. A smile that held more than just happiness. A smile of unconditional love. A smile of victory. Soon, this photo spread across social media. And those who had once judged Lily now spoke of her with admiration and respect. What a strong woman! She fought for her family and won. We were so wrong about her. She is extraordinary. But for Lily, people's opinions no longer mattered. She had won the most important battle of her life. She had saved her family. Life is full of challenges. But if you believe in something, if you fight for it, victory is possible. It doesn't matter what others say. What matters is what you want and how you fight for it. So chase your dreams, fight with all your heart, and write your own story of triumph. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like to support us. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. For more stories, subscribe and stay with us.